What's up, friends? Welcome back to another episode of STE Reacts. Today, we're talking about seed oils. They're on the tip of everybody's tongue. They're finally in the mainstream news media. They're certainly in your grandma's kitchen cupboards. But should they be? Or do they belong in the trash? Well, we've got to go to the wonderful internet to find out. So we're going to hear from all different kinds of people, anti-seed oil and pro-seed oil, to figure out whether seed oils are going to be the end of us and they're causing all of our modern health problems, or seed oils are actually this delicious savior that all of us should be looking to prioritize and get rid of those evil saturated fats. We'll let you make up your mind. Let's get into it. All right, a familiar face, Gary Brecker, is going to tell us why canola oil is good for you.
Canola oil and sunflower oil, these oils are not bad for you. That is true until they are industrially processed. You take a seed, let's say you take canola oil, and you press the canola, and it comes out very gummy. Well, now they need to degum it. So they degum it with something called hexane, which is a well-known neurotoxin. Once it's degummed, they heat it to about 405 degrees. When you heat an oil like that, it denatures and it turns rancid. So now you have a rancid oil that was degummed with a neurotoxin. And now when you cool that oil back down, it's cloudy. So they need to deodorize and decloud it, and they use sodium hydroxide, which is a known carcinogen. And then very often they can even use commercial bleaching agents like a mild amount of chlorine.
All right, so, I mean, interesting points there. I think that if you just took the seed and you cold pressed it and you had an oil, you might be able to argue that it's not damaging to health, and it could even be a healthy thing to consume. But when you take it through every step of that processing and you add in things like hexane and you add in things like chlorine, and it's just this monstrous effort to create something that is shelf stable, doesn't stink anymore, and looks palatable. And you have to wonder just from first principles whether that's something you should be eating, when you could take something like an olive and squash it and get some juice out of it known as olive oil. All right, who have we got here? So we got a nutrition doctor. Seed oils may lower your risk of heart disease. Let's see this clip.
I've got an opportunity to set the record straight. There's a number of different arguments they use. There's three key arguments that people use as a rationale for saying seed oils are toxic. And I'd love to work through each of these because I think it's important for listeners to be able to understand why this information is misinformation that they're reading. And so very briefly, one of them is that they use as an example an association of this increase in seed oil with increase in all of these different health issues that we're having now. And we can dive into this after. The other...
That's called correlation, by the way, what she's talking about. And people love to use correlation when it suits their narrative and then denounce it when it doesn't, with statements like, well, correlation doesn't equal causation, which is true, but there's no smoke without fire, right? And if there's something that is very tightly correlated with the increased consumption that exploded in the last 100 years in our diet, which is seed oils, soybean oil, canola, etc., it maps very, very tightly with worsening health outcomes, diabetes in particular, overweight, obesity, cardiovascular disease, etc. So, of course, correlation does not always equal causation, but there's a pretty clear smoking gun here, and that should at least give you pause for concern.
And they use is that it creates an unfavorable omega-6 to omega-3 ratio, causing inflammation. And again, we can do a deeper dive into this.
So that argument, she's talking about this O6 to O3 ratio. So if you observe ancestral consistent populations, they seem to have like a 1 to 3 parts to 1 omega-6 to omega-3. This is usually because indigenous populations will get around 1 to 3% of their calories from omega-6 rich foods, which might be nuts, etc. Whereas today, that number can be upwards of 10%, and even in extreme cases, 15% of the diet, which skews the omega-6 to omega-3 ratio. Some reports saying that it can be as high as 20 parts omega-6 for every 1 part of omega-3. And when that balance gets too wide, then it creates a state of rampant oxidation and inflammation in the body.
Oh, it's unnatural. It's gone through all this refinement process. It's bleached. My God, it's going to kill us because of this process. And then the fourth is that it's prone to oxidation.
That last one she talked about is what we just saw on the video previously, that these seed oils are highly processed. I mean, they weren't even ever invented to be consumed as an edible food source. or engine lubricants at first, and this whole reason that they go through this chemical processing is to make them into something that we can eat. She's going to tell us why that's apparently okay. So I'd love to hear her points on that, but that's what she's referring to there, that, oh my God, these are processed, so they can't be good for us. Well, let you make your mind up.
I.e. these seed oils, when they're heated, are prone to oxidation. And so what perhaps we could do is work through each of those and debunk each of those 4 myths.
Oh, she's going to debunk them.
Yeah, so one of the first things that people claiming seed oils to be toxic use is beautiful infographics, beautiful figures that show, a nice chart where you see on one axis of this figure increase in seed oil intake, and on the other axis you see increase in cardiovascular disease, cancer, type 2 diabetes. Think of all of these chronic related diseases that are increasing over the last 50 years. And you see this almost linear relationship, as we call it. So as your intake of seed oil increases, so does the level of all of these different diseases over the years.
So that sounds pretty bad.
Yes, it does. But that's association. It doesn't mean causation.
There it is. Association is not causation.
And what is really alarming here is that it's ignoring everything else that's happening over the last 50 years. The fact that actually these seed oils are typically now eaten as part of these very heavily processed unhealthy foods. So actually the majority of our intake of seed oils comes from these cereal-based foods, so pastries, from cakes and these kind of foods. And so it's not the seed oils themselves that are causing this. It's the ingredients, all of the other ingredients in these foods, but also what else has been happening over the last 50 years. So, our increase in...
It's always, I don't know, I always get curious as to why they need to defend the seed oil so ardently. She's basically said that it's not the seed oils. It's not the seed oils, was her words, unequivocally. It's not the seed oils. It's the other ingredients in these ultra-processed foods. Why is that so? Why is it not the seed oils? Why does every ultra-processed food contain seed oils? And why are you exonerating seed oils? Why do they get a free pass? I hope she'll go on to explain why we should just give seed oils a free pass and blame it on refined sugars and flours, which I'm not defending either, but these seem to come in conjunction. And if you look gram for gram at what's increased the most, it is the seed oils.
Being sedentary, so not, lack of physical activity, our increase in stress, our increase in sleep problems, et cetera, et cetera.
I mean, I definitely agree with her on the increase in stress, the increase in sleep disorders. These are all things that are happening. I think we can't ignore the fact that we stare at screens for 6, 8, 10 hours a day. The fact that we are hyper connected to stressful triggers that we otherwise wouldn't have been, historically speaking. These other things like the sleep disorders and the anxiety, they might be stemming from that, but they're also a systemically rooted issue, whether that is malnutrition, rampant oxidative stress, blue light toxicity. There's a lot of inputs here. But what I don't necessarily agree with fully is the fact that she's saying we're moving significantly less, because you can find cherry-picked data that suggests that our activity level is not that much different than it was 50 years ago, but our health is significantly different than it was 50 years ago. We're talking about a very small change in physical activity, but a rampant explosion in all-cause mortality.
What you see is consistently there is a favorable effect from increasing omega-6, which is a good marker of seed oil intake, with a reduction in coronary heart disease. We know that omega-6, which is this polyunsaturated fatty acid, so one of the main fatty acids in these seed oils, we know that it reduces our bad cholesterol. It has a very potent effect in reducing our bad cholesterol, which we call our LDL cholesterol.
So she's not wrong here. And I think this is why the science-based community and the evidence-based crowd love seed oils, because they have a hyperfixation on bad cholesterol, LDL. And she is right when she says that when you look at the studies that show swaps in saturated fat, cholesterol-rich foods with seed oil-rich foods or plant-based oils, that you will see LDL come down. Now, if LDL is this monster, and if you fully bought into the lipid heart hypothesis of cardiovascular disease, then anything that lowers LDL is a good thing. And I think that's where they get very blinkers on. But what they don't look at is what it can potentially do to oxidized LDL or raised levels of lipoprotein A. And these things can increase or signal increases in cardiovascular disease risk or damage to atherosclerosis, the damage to our blood vessels inside that can lead to other comorbidities, high blood pressure, insulin resistance, cellular damage, etc. But if you only look for one thing as the strongest signal and you can find it in the data, then it kind of exonerates you of being able to say unequivocally that seed oils are good.
Omega-6 is found in particularly high amounts in most seed oils, particularly sunflower oil, like I said earlier. And it is also found in quite high amounts in these other oils like soybean and canola oil. So it's the main polyunsaturated fatty acid that's in these oils. What we see is that an increase in omega-6 intake from these population epidemiological studies is actually associated with favourable effects on all-cause mortality. So I know we refer to that as, how likely is people are going to die. It's associated with huge reductions in LDL cholesterol, our bad cholesterol, and it's associated with reductions in cardiovascular disease. And it's this
a potential issue when they start talking about this stuff on the large-scale epidemiological studies, which, if you caveat that and look even larger scale at observational epidemiological studies and look at the greatest change in our food system in the last 100 years, it is the explosion of seed oils, and our health has gotten worse. But if you dial that in, as she's alluding to here, that when you look at cultures that eat more of these foods, that they tend to have better health outcomes. And you have to wonder if this is somewhat impacted by the healthy user bias, as we call it. So we've been beat over the head since the 1950s that saturated fat is harming your health, and that any health-conscious person then is going to steer away from those things. They're going to get the butter out of the house. They're not going to cook with the lard. They're going to bring in the Crisco, the I can't believe it's not butter, the canola oil, the Frylace. Let's not forget they are stamped with the seal of approval, heart healthy. So these people that are hoping to be healthier and build healthy habits are making those swaps. But it's not just the swaps from the food that could be impacting these results, because if they're trying to be healthy, they're probably doing other things that healthy people do. They're probably thinking about sleep. They're probably not smoking cigarettes. They're probably exercising a little bit more. So to then just focus and say, oh, look, they eat more seed oils and they have better outcomes, therefore seed oils are completely safe, without putting on the table everything else that they are also doing in the conquest to be a healthy person, is just a little bit narrow. And that's why the science on this stuff gets muddy. And that's why the randomized control trials are a mess. They're all over the place. Confounding variables are very hard to pass out and get a clean study, and borderline unethical because you can't keep people in a lab for a long period of time assessing their food. Then what do you have to do? Well, you have to look globally over the longest time span of data that we've got, observable metrics that we know in terms of health and health outcomes, and look at where it was, where it is, and then map on the biggest changes. And again, the biggest changes is the explosion in the intake and the amount of seed oils that we're eating.
I hate them. I love talking about them.
You like talking about seed oils?
This is a kind of a somewhat recent conversion for me. I've never bought into any diet fad or any of these hippie. Seed oils are of the devil. They are the cause of every problem in the world.
Wow.
Almost, I would say 99%. I'm so won over on this. Now, your wife is a doctor, so obviously you know that. Well,
I mean, I assumed it was crap, but then I dismissed it like every other stupid idea that I ever heard. Also, I'm sick of people making products from things that don't produce that product naturally. Oats are not for milk. And
well,
neither
you never get down on a little
and neither are almonds, and neither are soybeans.
No.
As it turns out, none of these things produce milk. And so if you give me a glass of milk that is made from a thing that doesn't produce milk, I'm suspicious.
Two good points. Firstly, Michael Knowles is based. Seed oils are the devil, maybe an extreme statement, but potentially could get on board with that. And he thinks they're problematic for 99% of people and causing rampant health disorders that we see. I would agree with him on that. And I would also agree with Ben Shapiro. If it didn't come from a booby, it ain't milk. It's nut juice at best. And it's also filled with these seed oils and these endocrine disrupting chemicals, not to mention laden with glyphosate residue from the sprays and all of that nasty stuff. If you want milk that bad, then get you some of the real stuff. Let's check out what Dr. Eric Berg has to say about black seed oil. This one, I get this question quite a lot.
Take it for brain health because it can actually increase something called acetylcholine, which is a neurotransmitter which can help your memory and your ability to learn and your focus and your concentration. But I think the majority of people take it mainly for inflammation on the skin like dermatitis. And you can take it orally as well as topically. And the question is, how much should you take? Well, I would recommend taking between 1 and 3 teaspoons per day. But always start out with just a little bit, maybe like maybe a half a teaspoon and work your way up. And it's really kind of bitter, doesn't really taste good, but if it starts to help you, you'll keep taking it.
That's interesting, right? Like the bitter comment, because we know some of the plants in the Brassicas family, the dark green bitters, that they can help with certain things. And I think what he's pointing at here, and something that globally is a good way to frame plants as medicine as opposed to foods. Like plants as a food, especially when we're talking about, you know, seed oils or rooted plants, they seem to be primarily fallback foods, things that we wouldn't necessarily prize from a hunter-gatherer standpoint, but things that we would certainly eat if we needed to eat them. We're always going to prioritize nutrient-dense things. If we can get our hands on meat and eggs and organs, we're going to go for that stuff because the animal in us knows that that's much healthier. But also we're going to forage, we're going to find these things. And we know that there are certain digestive enzymes in these bitters, for example, that can help kind of produce a medicinal-like effect. And with black seed oil, which seems to be going mainstream on social media right now, it's one of the less processed seed oils because it is literally the oil extracted from the seed. And I think it doesn't come with the negative health consequences of something like a canola oil because it's not gone through that massive processing chemically. And then it's also not put into a frying pan and heated up to high temperatures where it degrades further because of the unsaturated nature of the polyunsaturated fats that are chemically unstable and break down and oxidize in the presence of heat, light, and oxygen. So I think things like black seed oil can be looked at more medicinally used, and try it and see how it feels. These are much better than saying that, oh, well, it's a seed oil, and if this is good, the rest of them must be good. There's a very, very big distinction between a raw seed oil that you use for something like a topical treatment for your skin to see if it helps versus frying chicken nuggets in canola oil.
You're gonna look at canola oil so differently by the end of this video. Here's why. One tablespoon has 16% of your daily value of vitamin E and 8% of your daily value of vitamin K.
So that's interesting that she starts it out by saying that the tablespoon of canola oil has 16% of your vitamin E. So why does something like canola oil even have vitamin E in it? Vitamin E protects against something called lipid peroxidation. This is because the PUFA fats that are found, these, when we talk about seed oils, we're predominantly talking about PUFAs, polyunsaturated fatty acids, chemically weak, chemically unstable, multiple double bond fats that are prone to oxidation. Vitamin E protects against that oxidation. So when you extract the oil naturally, you're going to see high amounts of vitamin E. It's like an inbuilt entourage effect that's very wise from nature. However, what you see with chronic exposure to seed oils is the demand for vitamin E goes up and up and up as we store what we eat in our body fat, and the concentrations of omega-6 PUFA stores in our tissues, creating a low-grade state of oxidation, requiring more vitamin E to fight that oxidation, and we start to get that displaced. The vitamin E demand cannot be met through consuming more seed oils. God forbid that's not how you do it. You can combat some of these effects by supplemental vitamin E, or you can go to animal-based fats like suet, which is from cows, kidney fat that is naturally rich in vitamin E, much, much higher than the plant-based ones, and actually more chemically stable because it's predominantly a saturated fat. The bonds in that fat are very stable and don't break down in the presence of heat, light, and oxygen. So the vitamin E thing is interesting. It's like an inbuilt protective mechanism from nature, but the half-life of vitamin E is a lot shorter than the lifespan of polyunsaturated fats that get stored in your body that can potentially take years to get rid of.
Also rich in monounsaturated fats, which is known to reduce the bad cholesterol in your body. There's both pros and cons of using canola oil, so let's dig into the research. A randomized controlled trial showed that consuming 2 tablespoons of canola oil every day for 30 days significantly reduced C-reactive protein levels, which is a marker of inflammation. A systematic review and meta-analysis of 42 clinical trials, which guys, this is the highest quality of research you can get. They found that canola oil reduced LDL and reduced total cholesterol without affecting HDL. And that's alright. If you want to boost your HDL, eat some fiber, eat some fish. But there is evidence-based research suggesting its negative effects, especially relating to its oxidative stability, meaning how susceptible the oil is to breaking down at high heat temperatures. And you can tell once you start to see it smoking like this. One study found that canola oil degraded more than any other oils when heated over 392 degrees Fahrenheit for over 20 minutes. This study showed that canola oil degraded significantly more than any other oils under deep frying conditions. Canola oil lasted for 20 hours before it degraded to an unacceptable level. From these studies, we now know that canola oil doesn't do quite well at high temperatures over a long period of time. Yeah, that's great information.
So she starts out by kind of singing the praises of canola oil and then gets into where the rubber hits the road, which is like, but it seems that also the evidence suggests that when you heat canola oil, that's when all the bad stuff starts to happen. And you see this like kind of defense of seed oils from a lot of these people. They say the same kind of thing. It's like, oh, it's not a problem. It's totally fine until you heat it. So it's like seed oils only become a problem when you use them for what they're supposed to be used for, aka cooking, which is just ass backwards logic. It's like saying cigarettes are great for you until you smoke them. Well, yeah, no shit, but that's what you have cigarettes for. And that's why you have Crisco on your shelf. You're going to cook with it. And if cooking with it is what causes the problems, then why are we even trying to defend these things in the first place? They have a very low smoke point, and when it hits that smoke point, you are going to see all of these ill effects from mitochondrial damage, breaking cells, increasing insulin resistance, and everything else that comes with that. And the issue with all of these seed oils in the fryers at your fast food joint is that they are not replacing them day after day. They are running these things for days at a time, potentially even weeks at a time. And it's you saw from her stats that these are going to break down and start to oxidize into highly toxic substances within a few hours of use. In a fast food restaurant, that's probably the first time the fries are dunked in those. You are going to oxidize those, and then they're going to keep doing it over and over and over again, increasing very dangerous compounds like 4-HNE and all of these other lipid peroxidized effects from broken down seed oils. No bueno.
When you hear these people saying seed oil is toxic because of how it's produced and it's awful and it's a cause of all things in this country, do you believe it? You shouldn't. And I'm going to tell you the 3 reasons why. Number 1, seed oil isn't seed oil.
Do you believe it? And you shouldn't. Here's why I'm going to tell you to ignore what you saw with your own eyes, because I'm a doctor and I wear the symbol of the all-knowing, all-powerful bestower of truth. Ignore what you saw about all of that nasty chemical stuff, because you just should ignore it. Betray your own intuition. I am a doctor, I know better, and I'm here to save you and tell you why you should be guzzling seed oils. Well, thank you, Dr. Terry.
Number 1, seed oil isn't seed oil. It's actually a group of oils that are found in seeds. For example, did you know in canola oil, which is from rapa, the rapeseed oil plant, that contains something called oleic acid? What is oleic acid, you ask? That is a monounsaturated fatty acid, which is found commonly in olive oil and more commonly in canola. So when they say canola is evil, what do they base it on? How we extract the seeds with hexane.
Yes, oleic acid has been shown to have positive health impacts. Like you said, it's in olive oil. So just eat the olive oil, because even if there is higher amounts of oleic acid in something like canola oil, which is debatable, it's not going to offset the negative effects of everything that we've just discussed, like the elevated breakdown of these organic volatile compounds that are causing problems inside of the body, when you can just eat a bloody olive.
With hexane, which is a horrible compound. Well, yes, please don't drink hexane. But let's be clear. You will get more hexane from when you fill your car with gasoline and sniff that little bit of gas than you will if you happen to drink hundreds of thousands of gallons of vegetable oil. Really. So stop listening to the fearmongers. Vegetable oil is just fine. Seed oils aren't a problem. The one other one they'll say is, oh, it has too much omega-6, omega-3 fatty acid ratio, therefore it's inflammatory. But it's not. How do we know it's not? Because when we take people who consume vegetable oils commonly and we look at what it does to their blood system, we see less inflammation and better cardiac markers for people who use vegetable oil versus people who use saturated fat. Seriously. Vegetable oil isn't inflammatory for you because the human studies, not what's found in a mouse, not some idea that has more omega-6, not some weird idea like that, but what's actually done in genuine human studies, because that's what's important. It's not important what you think or logically can conclude. It's what do the human studies show. Now you're going to say, oh my God, they were paid for by...
What do you say just then? It's not important what you think or what you can logically conclude. It's important what the studies show. That sounds a bit like gaslighting to me. This is a guy who's a doctor who, less than 100 years ago, doctors were bringing different brands of cigarettes to the sides of patients' beds to tell them which ones were the best, because that's what the data shows. only to look back on that from this lens of presentism and say, did we lose our bloody minds? Now everybody knows that that is a dangerous thing, but the science was settled. And apparently this science is settled too. So you should just throw out what you think or what you can logically conclude, because the science is the altar that we all pray at these days. Not in this house.
Oh my God, they were paid for by big vegetable oil. You know, if you actually wanted to, I will list the sources for you. And no, it's not paid for by big vegetable oil. You know, we as doctors actually care what happens to our patients. We're actually incentivized by keeping you healthy, out of hospital. And one of the reasons that heart disease has gone down is more people are taking vegetable oil. And of course, then you'll see the people.
He just said they're incentivized for keeping you healthy and keeping you out of the doctor's office. That doesn't seem to be my current reading on the situation. It seems that the average length of time that somebody spends with their physician is 8 to 12 minutes. There's nothing remotely root cause centric. It's a disease economy. It's a sick care system. It's a pill. It's a potion to match with your symptoms. And it's kind of profitable if you dictate the foods that people eat so that then you can one day tell them the drugs they're going to take for the rest of their life. And this drug will cause this side effect, which will lead you to another drug. And all of a sudden you're on a dozen and you are lining Big Pharma's pockets. And the doctors are puppeteering on the ends of those strings because that's the system that they have been co-opted by. And that's the system that they come up with, the system that designed their education. So I don't know about this. We're incentivized to keep people healthy, because if we were, I think we'd be doing a whole lot more to actually talk about interventional lifestyle changes instead of being quick to throw a pill, a poke, or a potion at everybody that walks through the door. So there you have it, folks. I think you know where I stand. I don't think that if you look with any kind of logic and ancestral wisdom that seed oils belong in the human diet at all. I think the science that the evidence-based community refers to is murky at best. It's confounded and it's riddled with corruption. And I think that just using your common sense will tell you enough that something that has to go through that much chemical adulteration when there are natural options like coconut oil, olive oil, butter, lard, tallow, it just doesn't make sense to eat these things. And I think that you and your families will be much better off throwing them in the trash and getting them out of your homes.